This event is what some of your teachers, some of your lecturers have talked about for the last couple of years. The most significant event affecting journalism has been the assassination of President Kennedy. That event, of course, obviously happened here, but it was also something that changed a lot of things. Notice I say major media usage changed in television 24/7. What I'm talking about is the fact that before this, we didn't really talk about television as being a place we went to when there was an emergency situation. Sure, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, but in those days, this was the event that made people come around to television to give them some idea of what was happening. This is before we had any kind of mini cams that we have now, no breaking news in these days, no satellite feeds, no cell phones, PCs, internet. For those of you who are students in here, those big monstrous things you see on either side of that piece of paper, those are teletype machines. They used to be in every single newsroom here. They used to spit out paper constantly. And it was the job of individuals who were the least senior in the newsroom, in other words, the youngest. Your job was to strip those machines and to separate everything so that people had the information that was necessary to do the stories they wanted to do. You'll notice in the middle it says that President Kennedy is dead. That is the bulletin that came out that specific day. But I don't know if you can really read it, but there's some inaccurate information in there. It says Officer J.D. Tippit was slain as he and a fellow policeman, names that policeman, ran into a rear exit of the Texas Theater. That did not happen. So this is news in the making, news that's going on. But this is news that the public really never got a chance to see because that just went to the newsroom. The day that this actually occurred, the district attorney, Henry Wade, he's talking to reporters right there, giving them some idea of what's going on or trying to figure out exactly what happened. These are pictures from our studios just a little while earlier. How many have heard of the Zapruder film? This man is Abraham Zapruder, or as he said, I believe to our folks, Abraham Zapruder. He is telling exactly what he saw that day to one of our folks. Obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald, talking about his arrest, complaining about his treatment. You'll notice the bruise on his forehead. He said that a policeman hit him. The police said that he got into a scuffle with the officers who arrested him. On the right side of that picture is Bert Shipp, who is still with us. Bert Shipp has just written a fantastic book. I think it's called The Headlines at 10 or something like that, which I would urge you to read. Really funny, quite salty, but that's our Bert Shipp. Of course, this is a picture many remember, Mrs. Kennedy, President Johnson, Mrs. Johnson. These pictures from outside Air Force One. That's the White House. This event was the first time this whole country, this whole planet, saw as a live event, breaking news. The shooting of Oswald, the shooting of the President of the United States did not happen live. He was shot in a motorcade. Even though there were media with him, none of that was live. This was live. This was going into every single home around the country at the time. Lee Harvey Oswald shot. Of course, the funeral of President Kennedy. Nonstop coverage started then. It didn't just end with a quick report that the president had been shot. What happened was they went on and they stayed on full time. As you probably saw, remember September 11th, they went on and they stayed on, and they did not change. So that kind of thing started with this. Chet Huntley, David Brinkley on the left, Walter Cronkite in the middle. Most people don't remember this man. That's Ron Cochran from ABC News. In those days, ABC's news only went 15 minutes long every day. Didn't go a half an hour, went 15 minutes long. But that day, they were busy doing all kinds of things. And they did not go off that night, I might add. Now, here's the strange part. Your previous speakers talked about how the coverage that they provided changed everything. It changed how they covered stories. I was alive at the time, but I was a small kid, and I didn't see any of the things that I just showed you. I lived in Spain. My father was in the military. At that time, there were a number of military bases in Spain, and we lived at the one that's right in the middle, right in Madrid, Spain. I was an elementary school student. That's Base Aérea de Torrejón, which is right outside of Madrid. That base has no Americans there now, but at the time, it did have Americans who were living there. That's an aerial view of the base at the time. It was run by an organization called the Strategic Air Command. That gives you some idea of where our house was on the base. I do that because I want you to know something about this next picture. The Strategic Air Command, which no longer exists as a command, used to be in charge of two legs of what we used to call the nuclear triad in this country. We delivered our response to any kind of attack on this country, a nuclear response, via missiles, via bombers, or submarines. The Strategic Air Command, who was in charge of the base I just showed you, the Strategic Air Command was in charge of two legs of that triad. Well, in those days, the suspicion was that the Russians did this. This week is the week that President Kennedy, I think it's 50 years ago, this week that President Kennedy had to deal with a Cuban Missile Crisis. So imagine the year earlier, the tensions with the Russians, and all of a sudden the president is assassinated. So what happened was everybody went on alert. And when I say alert, I mean alert. They were serious. We might have gone to war that particular time. So that is why the death of President Kennedy changed a lot of events. I tell you that to show you something different. I lived in Spain twice, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. We went back in 1973. And I tell you, more hair. I tell you that because I went to work at the radio station where we lived. We had I tell people we had no TV, but the fact is we did have TV, but Francisco Franco, who ran Spain at the time, he was in charge of that television, so we never watched it. So 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I didn't watch television at all, but I became the intern at this radio station, AFN Spain Studios, which is right down the street from our homes. Now, as an intern, what that meant was that I had to strip those wires. Remember I told you about those wire machines? We had the same ones there. I had to strip those wires and separate them so that individuals who had some idea would have some idea of what the news was going on in the world and all the new developments. Now, Francisco Franco was in charge of Spain at the time. Luis Carrero Blanco, this man, was second in charge. He was the prime minister at the time. Franco was called El Caudillo, which means like the leader at the time. But what happened to Luis Carrero Blanco when I was an intern was he was assassinated. They put dynamite under his car. They blew so much dynamite and explosive under his car, it lifted that car over a 6-story building. It landed on the other side and it killed him. So here I am, looking at these wire machines, watching them and seeing that this guy, 12 to 13 miles from where we are, has been assassinated. So I strip the wires. I see it on the wire services. I give it to the announcer, and I say, hey, man, you know, this just happened. We need to tell people about this right away. That's what happened in the Kennedy assassination, right? We got the news out as soon as possible. The announcer, who was in the military, took one look at me. This is no joke. I saw all the color drain from his face. He said, and he put his finger about right here. He said, you don't talk to anybody. You don't pick up the telephone. You say nothing to no one. You don't go anywhere. You just stand right here. Phone started to ring. He said, you don't move. I'm not kidding. I don't want you talking to anyone. He picks up the phone, calls somebody. I don't know who it was. And then we are told by whoever that somebody is that, hey, you know what? I just want you to play classical music. Notice the difference in how these two things are handled in our country and in Spain at the time. Just play the classical music. Now, every TV station, every radio station, every newspaper in Spain at the time knew about this. But nobody's going to talk about it. Because our word is just play the classical music. So all across the base and all across Madrid, the signal that we're sending out on this FM radio station, the signal that we're sending out is telling people quite simply, we're playing classical music. Something is about to happen. And the reason is because Franco is concerned about a coup. He wants to deploy his troops, move them in a position so that if he is being attacked, he can defend his country. Now, remember, Francisco Franco is a dictator. The Spaniards would tell you at the time, oh, no. This is a democracy. It wasn't a democracy. You had a choice between Franco candidate number 1 and Franco candidate number 2. But what he was doing was moving his people. These individuals are called Guardia Civil, I guess you would say it in Castilian Spanish. And he's moving them all over the country, putting them in position so that if there is a problem, he's going to be able to deal with it. Those are the challenges that we had in the past. We had those, it's changed right now because of new technology. Also, a 24-hour news appetite. In those days, we thought the news came on, we had appointment television, what we used to call it. The news would come on at noon maybe, it might come on at 5 o'clock, it might come on at 6 o'clock. The morning news was a national news program. Most TV stations didn't have a morning news program. So now we have a 24-hour news appetite. You and I, we always want to get news and new information. The news content is different. The things that constitute what news is, they're different than they used to be. There are new journalists and there are content providers that are new. And so we're going to go through this, if we can, to give some idea of what it is we're talking about. You see, this is back in 1963. Every camera that you see there, not a one of those cameras can go live. Think of that happening today. Not a one of those cameras can go live. Those are all film cameras. What will happen is they're going to film, they're going to take it back to a TV station. It's going to be put into a separate rack. It's going to be sent through a processor, which is going to take 20 to 30 minutes. They're going to put it up on a reel, and they're going to run it in what we used to call a film chain, so you can watch it in a film chain. But that's going to take probably a whole process, about an hour. That is what they used to call breaking news. Look at all the radio people. Here is that's a newspaper photographer. He's got film in there, not digital photos in there. He's got film in there. The other cameras, again, the only thing that you could possibly go live with is the camera that's in front, the microphone that's in front of Henry Wade right there. You might be able to go live with just that microphone. That's about as portable as you got in those days. That's Eve Arnold, who I believe was a fashion photographer, but she liked to shoot on her own. But that is minimal equipment in 1963. Today, it's a whole new ballgame. It is a whole new ballgame. Any of these devices can put you on the air on this planet almost instantaneously. And if not now, in the future. This man, of course, has allowed everybody in the Arab Spring to become a journalist. Now, I put this up here, even though that's not going to allow you to go live, I put that up there because I think sometime in the next couple of years, if not now, what's going to happen to still photographers who work for newspapers is when they take a picture, it won't be stored in as a digital image on their camera. It'll be sent immediately back to an editor somewhere. Now, those cameras, I don't know how much you know about the DSLRs, but those cameras can also shoot video. So every one of these are now new sources of information that we have that will allow us, through technology, to go as quick as possible.